Welcome to the Market Mystics podcast. I'm Joshua.
I'm Kim. Let's dive in. Hey, everyone.
Welcome back to the Market Mystics.
Welcome back to the Market Mystics. We're trying out some new things on how to start the show, and I have an idea.
Let's hear it.
So, today I was driving my daughter and her two cousins home from school, and it's quite a commute. And I was asking them if they have any questions about God or their faith or anything like that. And they did have a question. So today we're going to start with questions from kids. And their question, and all of them had this question. Like one brought it up and the rest of them were like, yeah, we want to know this. Their question was, what do angels look like? And are they scary?
That's a great question. And I feel like
I thought it was a great question.
I think it's something that makes total sense in my mind as a kid. Also, especially especially your daughter is not unfamiliar with the concept of engaging heaven, and that you can, that encountering an angel would be a real possibility. So it makes total sense to me that she would have this question. I'll give you my answer, but I'm curious, what was your answer to them? What first popped into your mind when you were driving?
I didn't actually answer them because I told them they were talking about it. And I was wanting to get questions for the podcast so that we have some ideas of what to talk about. And so I'm sure I'll tell them that we recorded this. But what I first thought was, I don't even know in what book it was. Was it Isaiah? I think it was when he was in the throne room. Is this right? I don't know. The one where it's like thousands of eyeballs and the really wonky, scary looking sounding, scary looking ones. And I thought, well, yeah, there's some descriptions of some really scary looking ones. And then they were even talking about, and I was kind of impressed that they knew this. I was just really taking it in when they were, chatting about this, but they were talking about, of course, they're scary. That's why when they showed up to anyone, they would have to first say, don't be afraid.
That's funny because that was the very first thought that popped into my mind was that is how the majority of times the angels would introduce them or would say in the Bible when they first encountered someone.
Yeah, for first encounters, but then also there are other instances in the Bible where there were angels who were just familiar with people, right? It was it Peter's angel who came to the door? Peter was in prison.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. It was either Peter or Paul, and the people were just like, oh, it's just his angel.
Yeah, they're like, oh, it's Peter's angel at the door. Which is funny because that means it's fairly commonplace to interact, but also they recognized him. So I would say they obviously weren't afraid of them then, but maybe because they were familiar. But also I've personally encountered angels in different ways. I've seen them in different forms, even the same angel in different forms. I have seen one that was huge, giant, used a 40,000 square foot church building, didn't use it, but could have used it as a little Ottoman footstool, really giant. I've also seen that same angel appear more our size. And I've seen an angel appear as a ball of light. I've seen them appear as flashing lights. I have seen them as ethereal, almost holographic looking. But that's just my own personal. I mean, there are all the different forms that they could take, I believe. I don't know that they're limited to looking like one certain thing because they operate from a different realm. That's my opinion. What's your opinion, Josh?
I think probably similarly. I mean, the first thing that popped into my mind was that oftentimes in the Bible, the angels, when they go to speak to a person, say, "Hey, don't be afraid. I'm okay." So that to me, like maybe that's the fear of, "Hey, I just popped into your bedroom," or maybe
that's fair.
Or maybe it's the fear of the appearance. Who knows? The other thing that came into my mind is I believe that the living beings in heaven are as diverse as they are on the earth. And for lack of a better word, we often call all of them angels.
Yeah.
So, that doesn't, I think that could be interesting because I think the word, I think angel literally just means messenger. And so it's more of like a description of their function. And so could God use one of the cloud of witnesses who looks very human to be a messenger, and then we call that an angel? Could he use a seraphim, which is like what Isaiah describes, and have multiple faces and wings and wheels and whatever, that show up as a messenger, and we call that an angel? Sure. But I think my mind's always looking for definition. And so I'm always like, okay, well, when we say angel, what do we mean? Because there's lots of options.
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of where my mind goes with this, is could you have an encounter that was terrifying with a godly being? Sure, you probably could. But is it an angel, or can we be more specific about what it was? Yeah, I don't know. I think that's, I mean, just off the top of my head, seraphim, cherubim, archangels, angels, living creatures, the Bible describes all sorts of things that exist and live in heaven.
Right.
And so I think that there's probably levels to that answer, but I think the short answer is, yeah, it could be scary looking. And I think one of the cool things about having scary looking angels, if it's taught properly, is if you think about your guardian angel, the one who is assigned to you, who protects you and helps you learn your identity, might be kind of cool to have him be kind of tough if he's going to protect you.
That's fun. You know what else I was thinking about it being scary, and why they would need to say, don't be afraid or be not afraid. I was also thinking, I think their form takes different form than ours does. We were made in an image that wasn't, I never read anything that we were made in the image of angels, you know? But also the scary thing could be that it just is it's foreign. It just isn't familiar.
Yeah.
And so you see something that looks unlike anything you've ever seen before, and that might seem scary. But then they say, don't be afraid. I bring a word from the Lord or whatever. Then you know who they're from.
Yeah.
And so they're just, yeah. But I think that's kind of cool. I like exploring the mysteries and all of the unknowns.
Same.
That's why we're here.
So. That's literally why we're here.
Okay. So that was the question from kids. That was fun.
That was great. Thanks, kids. I hope you have more car rides to get some more questions.
I know. I'll have to play this in the car for them and let them listen so that they know that we did answer their question.
Yeah, I love it.
I might ask them again because I might want to hear more about what they think too. Sometimes I think kids are a little closer to their perfected state from where they came.
Yeah.
And might have some better insight and they may not have built so many boxes as we have. So I really do like hearing what kids have to say about these things too.
Yeah.
Because I think it's fascinating.
I agree. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, so second topic of the day. In one of our fairly recent episodes, we called it No Regrets. And yes, we did spell it like that on purpose, just to be funny. Listen, we have a very specific kind of humor here. And sometimes we wield that and it happens. Yes. And so you got no regrets. But we had a really great comment. And they were talking about, let's see. She was talking about a friend of hers passed away suddenly, and she was asked to call her back to life, bring her back to life, resurrect her. And she said she couldn't because she didn't feel like the Lord was saying to do that. And I wanted to talk about that today. I have a story, as always. A few years ago, maybe 2 years ago, I'm not sure. I was driving my son to practice in an evening, going a route we go all the time. And shortly after we got on the highway on the way there, we saw a horrible, horrible accident. I actually don't know what happened because somebody was coming from the other side of a very big median. It's like a pretty big highway, like completely just like whipped the wheel and went straight across into our lane and hit a FedEx truck. And then they both went down, like this was a raised up road, went down into a ditch, and it was horrific. It was like horrible to see. And it was maybe 6 or 7 car lengths in front of us, and there wasn't really anybody else between us and them. So we stopped to see if we could help. A bunch of people stopped, and I was one of them that went down to the FedEx truck, and someone went and felt for a pulse to see if he was still alive, and he wasn't. And I was like in it, and I was just asking God for life, for him to be brought back to life, that we're believing for life and not death, and all of these things. And then when the paramedics got there, they did find a pulse, and so he was alive. And I found out a few days later, because, you know, when you see something like that, you know it's going to be on the news, and then you kind of follow the news story because you kind of want to know if people are okay or not. Yeah. And he had passed away like the next day or something. And I was talking with the Lord about it, and he taught me a really important lesson in that he pretty much said, just because you can doesn't always mean that you should. And this is in regard to calling people back to life and raising people from the dead. And I think it's one of those things that we kind of miss that part. Like, we don't always connect those dots. Sometimes it's like, well, we're going to pray that they come back to life. Well, is that the will of God, or is that you just knowing you can, and so you're going to decide to do it? And your will and his will may be different in an instance. And so sometimes it's like, and, you know, as mystics and people who really want to align with the Father and do what he's doing, sometimes you are called to it, and then you know you can do it. And then other times you get into a similar situation and you may think, well, that's what I do. Well, not always is that what you should do. And I think it's a really important distinction.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's an important distinction. And I think you have a great perspective on it, because like you've seen both sides of that coin. And so like you have the muscle memory of, well, this is just what we do. And you also like have that story of like, well, pay attention to it. I think this is really interesting because I recently listened to a pretty long interview with a guy who wrote a book on near-death experiences. And I don't necessarily know that any of them were like resurrection stories, but one pretty common theme of the people he interviewed like 1,500 people who had near-death experiences, where most of the times they were clinic. I think every time, for it to classify as that, they have to be like clinically dead and come back. And he, something that was very common was that people didn't actually want to come back. Like once they got to that other side and they experienced a life they didn't know was possible, they often didn't want to come back. And that, I think, is an interesting thing because on our side, we're like, well, of course we want them to be here, but we don't know what their heart is. And we also don't know the Father's heart for the situation unless he shares it with us. And I do think there are certainly times where the Father will call you to speak life back into someone because it wasn't their time.
Yeah. Well, in this instance that I'm talking about, what he showed me, and it was a hard lesson to learn, was that by calling this man back and kind of having him resurrected, I suppose, it just put him back into a lot of pain because his body was so broken that it could not function on its own. And it just prolonged and like subjected him to further pain, that is a hard pill to swallow, you guys. Like, I'm like, oh, that's never what I would intend. You know what I mean? And my intention was fully like, oh, I'm believing for life. Absolutely. It's life and not death. Like all of those things. It was pure in heart, but it wasn't to the maturity level that the Lord has called me to be in. Like it wasn't to the point of actually doing what he's doing. It was kind of stepping back and only mimicking what he's done.
Right.
And that's kind of different.
Yeah. And I'm also thinking like there very likely is a level of maturity where like his body could have also been healed and returned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like there's probably also a place where that happens as well. Like, I just think that like, I don't know where my mind is going with this conversation is just that there's a lot of variables in that situation. I've heard stories of people like who their spouse dies and they pray for them to come back, and the spouse comes back and it's like, why did you do that? I'm in so much pain now. Would you please just let me go? And they die. And then the spouse is like, no, it's not your time. And they bring them back and they like go back and forth like this. And it's like, I think sometimes it's like trying to work it out in yourself. Like, especially because we believe in life and more life and more life and more life. It's hard to wrap your mind around like any form of death and decay being okay. But until we reach a point where we are mature enough to steward that, maybe I don't know, maybe that happens.
Maybe. I have another question about this. Because I was thinking as you were saying that, like, we believe in life and more life and more life and more life. And we kind of don't want anything to do with death and decay if we can avoid it. However, I don't know that it's our decision to make. And I think that's the hard thing in this subject. I'm thinking back a couple years. I had a grandmother who was horribly close to me. who was on a steady decline for years, and we were just caring for her through the end of her life. And she often talked about just being ready. And I think I talked about this. I had a grandfather who passed away too. But that was different because he didn't know the Lord. And I feel like that's a different paradigm.
Right.
But with my grandmother, like, it felt like she was choosing that. And I don't know that I have any right or authority to decide for her. And I don't know that I actually really legitimately, like, in ignorance, I don't know if that would ever be anyone else's decision. What do you think?
I mean, I think it's such a personal question, because everyone's going to have their own life experience, their own difference. I have a friend who one of their family members has been struggling fighting cancer for years. And I had a conversation with them recently where, like, I don't want to say they had given up, but you could tell that, like, the fight had taken so much out of them they didn't know how to give anymore. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't that they were wishing for death, it wasn't that they had surrendered to death, but you could feel that, like, oh, this is, like, weighing so heavy. I don't know that I personally could understand the situation they're in, but from whatever perspective I could see it. But it is such a, like, it's a very personal thing, and for you to decide that for someone else is I don't exactly know how you do that. I think, I really don't want this to be, we're speaking against resurrection, because we're not at all.
No, not even a little.
Yeah, because I think that's, like, that is also a very real part of life. I just think, like, what we're encouraging you is to have the relationship with the Lord where he can say yes right now, or no, not right now.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree. To what you were saying about the person who'd been battling for so long that, like, it had just taken it out of them. It made me think about the terminology that we use of passing on, like passing away, passing on. I wonder if at that point, like, they're not able to find any more life here, so they have to go where the life is. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
What if it has less to do with death and more to do with finding the life? Is that's probably a crazy thought, but I mean, knowing what we know about eternal life and who the Father is and what he has for us, I wonder if that ever is kind of on the table and why some of that stuff happens. I mean, obviously there's a bunch of different reasons, and I'm just, I don't know, contemplating, but it does make me wonder, like, sometimes when you've given all that you have, is it just better to go where you can find life?
Yeah. I've brought this up multiple times, but when we interviewed Michael Keene some time ago, he talked about how a lot of times death is a place of, you can't carry the weight of the world anymore. Like, you just like, it's just too much, and the only way you know how to survive is to let go of it. And so you let go of it and you go to heaven. And I think that is a form of choosing life, in a situation where you don't know how to do anything but live in death and decay. I just don't know if it is I don't know if that's always going to be the way it is. I tend to think that's not going to be the way it always is. But it is the way it is now for many, many people. And so, like, can we reframe that into into a place where we see it as a way of choosing life? Maybe so.
That's kind of where my brain's going. But also, I mean, I really am. I think I'm really stuck on this choosing life thing, because I still am not sure that we can rightfully choose that for anyone else. Because I think it's really interesting. We talk so much about immortality and like being deathless and not dying and living and these things. And I personally believe for that. I don't believe that there is death and decay set up for me. I think that life and life abundantly is set up for me. So I'm very much in that fork of the road, but also we're talking about this, and I don't know that I can think that choosing life in a different way is terrible.
Right.
Do you know, it's a really interesting thing to hold both of these at the same time.
Yeah.
You know?
I think it is. But I think it's important to find a way to hold both or navigate both, because if you only sit on one side of it, then you're probably going to create conflict within yourself. And conflict within yourself is often what leads to sickness and dysfunction. And so, like, the more we can find a way to say, yes, I believe in life and always life, and also this other thing exists, which maybe I don't understand, but maybe is also choosing life.
Maybe it's also choosing life. This is probably not an epiphany for anyone else. I feel like all of a sudden I'm like, oh, there's another box that I've built that I'm having to tear down. You know what I mean? Like, only this perspective of life is valid life. And I don't know that it was ever that hard and fast.
Yeah.
But are there other ways of having life and life abundantly that doesn't look exactly like walking on this earth? I mean, obviously I know about eternal life, right? Okay. But I wasn't connecting the dots with the death in between.
Yeah.
I think just maybe people aren't actually choosing death. Like death as it is in scripture sometimes, and spiritual death. I think sometimes it is still choosing life. That's hard.
It's a good one to wrestle with.
I think it is. It's getting me right now.
I would be really curious for the comments on this one. So if you're listening on Spotify, you're listening on YouTube, like, leave a comment of your thought, of your inner struggle with this question, of what the conversation stirred up in you. Yeah, just let us know what this has been like.
Yeah, that would be great. Okay. Until then, thank you for joining us on this journey today.
Yes. Thank you, guys.
Hey, thanks for listening. Keep up with us along this journey by liking, subscribing, and becoming a member through YouTube.
Members get exclusive access to bonus content with our guests, deeper dives into topics, and a look into other projects. We're glad to have you here. See you next time.